Imagine a darkness so complete it feels like a physical substance pressing in from all sides. The air is cold, still, and heavy with the smell of damp earth and stone. You are sitting folded in the lotus position, in a space so small your knees and shoulders brush against the rough-hewn rock. Above you is not a ceiling but tons of soil, roots, and the silent life of a forest. Your only connection to the world you have left behind is a thin bamboo tube for air, and your only task is to breathe. In your hand, you hold a small, simple bell. Once a day, you will ring it, a single clear note that travels up to the surface, telling your brothers that you are still alive, still conscious, still continuing your final meditation. And you will keep ringing it day after day until you no longer have the strength. That is the moment your long journey will be complete. This is not a horror story, nor a punishment. It is the chosen final step of a sacred process, undertaken with a clarity and purpose that most of us can barely comprehend. Before we start, a quick roll call. Write in the comments which part of this planet you're watching from, and then just listen and enjoy. This image of a human being, willingly entombed and waiting for their own body to cease functioning, poses a profound question. Why would a person or a spiritual tradition devise such a path? Why would someone willingly choose to undergo years of the most extreme hardship imaginable, systematically preparing their own body to resist decay, all for the purpose of mummifying themselves? Over the course of our journey together, we will explore this very question. We will delve into the ancient Japanese practice of Sokushinbutsu, or the act of becoming a Buddha in this very body. We will walk through the process step by step, from the diet that strips the body of its ability to rot, to the final silent meditation in the earth. By the end, you will understand not only how this was done, but more importantly, the powerful spiritual belief that drove these monks to transform their own mortality into a final, enduring act of compassion. Sokushinbutsu is a practice that hovers at the very edge of human endurance, faith, and biology. It is so far removed from modern conceptions of life and death that it can be difficult to grasp its intention. For us, death is often seen as a failure, a medical event to be postponed at all costs, and the body afterwards is something to be quickly and hygienically handled. The idea of meticulously preparing one's own flesh to last for centuries seems almost alien. But for the Shingon Buddhist monks who practiced this, the body was not an enemy to be defeated by death. It was a vessel, a tool that could be perfected and transformed through immense discipline, not for personal salvation in an afterlife, but to serve the living for generations to come. This was not about escaping the world, but about remaining a part of it in the most permanent way they knew how. They believed that by achieving this state, they would not be truly dead, but would instead enter a state of deep, eternal meditation, becoming a beacon of spiritual energy, a living Buddha that people could turn to for solace and guidance. The process itself was a multi-year odyssey of self-abnegation, a slow, deliberate walking away from everything that constitutes a normal life. It was divided into stages, each lasting around 1,000 days. Think about that for a moment. A commitment measured not in weeks or months, but in increments of nearly 3 years. Each stage pushed the body and mind further, stripping away dependencies, comforts, and even the very tissues that make us soft and perishable. It began with diet, the most fundamental connection we have to the world. The monks would retreat into the mountains and consume only what the wilderness provided: nuts, seeds, berries, and bark. This wasn't just about spiritual purity. It had a stark biological purpose. It systematically eliminated all body fat. Fat is one of the primary tissues that holds water and encourages decomposition after death. By removing it while still alive, they were essentially beginning the mummification process from the inside out, turning their own physiology into a willing partner in their spiritual goal. Imagine the willpower required. While fellow monks ate simple meals of rice and vegetables, these ascetics would chew on pine needles and roots, their bodies growing leaner and harder with each passing season. This was accompanied by rigorous physical hardship, meditating under freezing waterfalls, undertaking long pilgrimages through treacherous mountain terrain, all designed to forge an unbreakable link between mind and body, where the spirit was in absolute control of the flesh. They were not simply waiting to die. They were actively reshaping their physical form into a sacred relic. The world outside, with its politics, its pleasures, its attachments, would slowly fade into a distant memory. The only reality becomes the breath, the chant, the cold stone of the mountain, and the slow, methodical transformation of the self. The final stages of this preparation were even more extreme, involving a diet that would be toxic to an ordinary person. The monks would drink a special tea made from the sap of the urushi tree, the same tree used to make Japanese lacquer. In small, controlled doses, it induced vomiting and a rapid loss of bodily fluids, further desiccating the body. But its most important function was what it did internally. The toxic compounds would permeate every organ, rendering the body poisonous to the flesh-eating bacteria and maggots that would normally begin their work after death. They were, in a very real sense, turning their own bodies into their own sarcophagi, embalming themselves from within while their hearts were still beating. It was the final, irreversible step. Once this tea was consumed, there was no turning back. It was a declaration that the journey towards becoming a Sokushinbutsu was entering its final phase. And so we return to our monk, sitting in the darkness. He is not there as a man who has given up. He is there as a person who has completed a lifetime of work. His body is no longer a source of hunger or desire. It is a purified vessel, prepared with unimaginable dedication. His mind is not filled with fear, but with a singular focus honed over thousands of days of meditation. The small stone chamber is not a grave, it is a chrysalis. He sits and waits, not for an end, but for a transformation. The sound of his own breathing fills the silence. The smooth, cool metal of the bell rests in his hand. And with each slow beat of his heart, he moves closer to fulfilling his vow. To become a permanent fixture of compassion in a transient world, a quiet anchor for souls lost in the storm. The bell is his final whisper, a promise that even as he departs from life, he intends to remain. To truly understand the monk in his stone tomb, we must travel back in time, more than a millennium, to the origin of this extraordinary idea. This practice did not emerge from nothing. It is the ultimate expression of a powerful theological concept, deeply rooted in the life of one of Japan's most revered historical figures. His name was Kūkai, known posthumously as Kobo Daishi, and he was the founder of the Shingon school of Buddhism in the early 9th century. Kūkai was more than a monk. He was a scholar, a poet, an artist, and a spiritual innovator whose influence on Japanese culture is immeasurable. But it is the story of his departure from the world that planted the seed for Sokushinbutsu. In the year 835, at the age of 61, Kūkai announced to his disciples that he was not going to die, but was instead going to enter a state of eternal meditation. He stopped taking food and water, spending his final days chanting sacred mantras. After he ceased breathing, his followers sealed him in his mausoleum on the sacred Mount Koya. Here is where the story takes a turn that defines everything that follows. According to Shingon tradition, Kūkai did not die. He entered Nyūjō, a state of profound meditative absorption where the physical body is maintained, free from decay, while the spirit remains present, working for the salvation of all beings. Legend holds that decades after his entombment, the mausoleum was opened, and Kūkai was found perfectly preserved, his complexion unchanged, his hair having grown longer. To this day, the monks on Mount Koya believe he is still inside, meditating. Twice a day, in a solemn ritual, they bring him a meal. They believe his clothes are changed and his hair and nails are trimmed. He is not a relic of the past, he is a living presence. This foundational belief that a human being through supreme spiritual discipline could transcend death and remain physically present in the world is the blueprint for every Sokushinbutsu monk who followed. They were not inventing a new path. They were attempting to walk in the footsteps of their founder, to achieve a fraction of his sacred accomplishment. The theological engine driving this is a doctrine called Sokushinbutsu. The phrase translates to attaining Buddhahood in this very body. This is a radical and beautiful idea. Many spiritual traditions view the body as a temporary vessel, a prison of flesh from which the soul or spirit must eventually escape to achieve enlightenment or enter paradise. Shingon Buddhism, however, teaches something different. It posits that the physical body is not an obstacle to enlightenment. It is the very medium through which enlightenment is realized. The universe, the Buddha, and our own bodies are not separate things. They are all manifestations of the same ultimate reality. Therefore, it is possible, through intense and dedicated practice, to transform this very body, this collection of flesh, blood, and bone, into the body of a Buddha, to realize its inherent divinity without having to wait for death and rebirth. Think of the body not as a cage, but as an instrument. With enough practice and dedication, that instrument can be tuned to play a divine, cosmic melody. This is where we must draw a critical distinction. When we hear the word mummy, our minds almost inevitably go to ancient Egypt. We picture gilded sarcophagi, canopic jars, and the elaborate rituals of the Book of the Dead. But the motivation of the Sokushinbutsu monks was fundamentally different from that of the pharaohs. Egyptian mummification was a technology for the afterlife. It was about preserving the physical form so that the deceased's soul, or *Ka*, would have a home to return to as it navigated the perilous journey through the underworld. The entire process was focused on ensuring a successful existence in another realm. The preserved body was a piece of spiritual luggage for a trip to eternity. The goal was profoundly individual, the salvation and eternal life of a specific person, be it a king or a noble. The living were left behind. The dead were prepared for their own separate journey. Sokushinbutsu turns this logic completely on its head. The monk's goal was not to prepare for a journey into the afterlife. His vow was precisely the opposite: to stay. He was not preserving his body for his own use in another world. He was transforming it into a sacred object, a spiritual battery for the benefit of the community he was leaving behind. His objective was entirely altruistic. By becoming a Sokushinbutsu, he believed he could remain as a tangible point of contact between the mundane and the sacred. People could come to his enshrined form, pray to him, and draw strength from his meditative presence. He was not a dead ancestor. He was a living Buddha, perpetually holding a space of compassion for the world. His body was not a vessel for his own soul's journey, but a gift to the future, a final physical manifestation of his vow to save all sentient beings. This distinction is everything. It reframes the entire practice from an act of extreme, perhaps even morbid self-interest into an act of radical compassion. The Egyptian mummy is hidden away in a deep-sealed tomb, protected for its own journey. The Sokushinbutsu, if successful, is brought back out into the light, dressed in fine robes and placed in a temple for all to see. One is a gateway to the next world. The other is an anchor in this one. The process was not about defying death, but about repurposing it. Death was not an endpoint, but a transition into a different state of being, a permanent state of service. The body, therefore, becomes the ultimate testament to one's faith. It is the final canvas upon which the monk paints his masterpiece of devotion. To understand the grueling steps they took next, we must hold this core belief in our minds. They were not destroying their bodies. They were perfecting them. They were architects of their own sacred relics, building a bridge of flesh and bone that they hoped would span centuries. The journey to becoming a Sokushinbutsu does not begin with a sudden decision, but with a commitment so vast it is measured in seasons, not days. The first step is a period of 1,000 days, nearly 3 full years, of profound physical and spiritual recalibration. This initial phase is a kind of purification by subtraction, a slow and deliberate shedding of everything that ties the body to the world of comfort, pleasure, and ultimately, decay. It is centered around a practice known as mokuji kigyo, which translates to tree-eating training. The monk retreats from the communal temple kitchen and its simple but nourishing meals of rice and cooked vegetables. He now must sustain himself only on what he can forage from the mountain forests: nuts, seeds, berries, pine needles, and the occasional edible bud or piece of fruit. He drinks only water, often from the cold, pure mountain streams. Imagine this transition. The warmth of a shared meal is replaced by the solitary search for sustenance. The pleasure of a full stomach is replaced by a constant, gnawing emptiness that must be overcome not with food, but with meditative focus. This diet serves a crucial dual purpose, one spiritual and the other starkly biological. On the spiritual plane, It is a direct assault on attachment. For most human beings, food is not just fuel. It is culture. It is comfort. It is connection. It is pleasure. By willingly relinquishing this, the monk begins to sever one of the most powerful tethers to worldly desire. Each pang of hunger becomes an opportunity for reflection. Each simple bitter nut becomes a lesson in necessity over luxury. The practice forces the mind to find a different source of sustenance, turning inward to the strength of one's vows and the clarity of one's purpose. It is a slow, methodical lesson in emptying the self. The ego, which so often defines itself by its wants and needs, begins to dissolve when those wants are systematically denied. The body, no longer a source of pleasure, starts to become what the doctrine intends it to be, simply a tool for enlightenment. And here's what's fascinating from a modern scientific perspective. This ancient spiritual practice aligns perfectly with the biological requirements for mummification. The monks may not have used the language of cellular biology, but through generations of observation and practice, they understood a fundamental truth. Fat is the enemy of preservation. Body fat, or adipose tissue, is rich in lipids and water. After death, it is one of the first tissues to break down, providing a perfect, nutrient-rich environment for bacteria to thrive. This bacterial activity is the engine of decomposition. So, the first 1,000-day diet, consisting almost entirely of foraged foods with minimal fat and caloric content, has a very clear physiological goal: to strip the body of every last ounce of subcutaneous and visceral fat. It is a process of extreme weight loss, a controlled starvation that pushes the body into a state of ketosis, where it begins to consume its own fat reserves for fuel. By the end of this period, the monk's body would be incredibly lean, almost skeletal, consisting of little more than skin, muscle, and bone. They were, in essence, making their bodies an inhospitable desert for the microorganisms that cause decay. This dietary austerity was not undertaken in quiet repose. It was paired with a regimen of extreme physical exertion. This was not about rest. It was about hardening the body and spirit through constant motion and hardship. The monks would undertake long, arduous pilgrimages through the rugged mountains of Dewa Sanzan, covering miles of treacherous terrain each day. They would perform taki jayo, or waterfall meditation, standing for hours under the crushing, ice-cold water of a mountain cascade, chanting mantras until their bodies turned numb. This physical activity served to accelerate the fat-burning process, but its primary purpose was, again, spiritual. It was a method for cultivating immovable resolve. To endure the freezing water, the aching muscles, the exhaustion, this was to prove the mind's absolute dominion over the body's complaints. The pain was not seen as a negative sensation to be avoided, but as a neutral phenomenon to be observed and transcended. It was a forge, and in its fire, the will was tempered into steel. Think about the passage of these 1,000 days. 3 winters would come and go, burying the mountains in snow and making foraging a desperate struggle. 3 springs would arrive, bringing with them the relief of new buds and shoots. The monk would watch the seasons turn, not as a passive observer, but as an active participant in the landscape's cycles of scarcity and abundance. His own body would mirror this process, withering in the harsh times, finding just enough to continue in the gentler ones. The outside world, the world of politics, family, and society, would recede, becoming a distant echo. The monk's entire universe would shrink to the mountain, the sky, the contents of his foraging pouch, and the inner landscape of his own mind. By the end of this first stage, the monk was already a changed being. Physically, he was a shadow of his former self, but spiritually, he was more solid and resilient than ever before. He had passed the first great test. He had demonstrated the discipline and endurance necessary for the even more difficult stages that lay ahead. He had successfully laid the foundation, transforming his body from a soft, perishable vessel into a lean, dry canvas, ready for the final sacred artistry of self-mummification. He was not yet a Buddha, but he was no longer just a man. He was a process in motion. Having successfully endured the first 1,000 days, the aspiring Sokushinbutsu does not rest. He does not take a moment to recover. Instead, he immediately enters the second stage of his transformation, another 1,000-day period of even greater austerity. If the first phase was about stripping away the body's excesses, this next phase is about actively beginning the process of desiccation, the removal of water, while still alive. The diet, already incredibly sparse, becomes almost unimaginably severe. The monk now ceases to eat even nuts and berries. His entire sustenance is derived from what he can harvest from a very specific source, the forest's trees. He now subsists on nothing but bark, roots, and pine needles. This is a diet that provides almost no nutritional value in the conventional sense. It is abrasive, difficult to digest, and offers infinitesimally few calories. It is not a diet for living, it is a diet for the process of dying. The physiological impact of this regimen is profound and brutal. The human body is approximately 60% water, held within our cells, our blood, and the spaces between our tissues. This internal moisture is essential for life, but it is also the primary medium for post-mortem decay. To become a mummy, the body must become dry. The diet of bark and roots is engineered to achieve precisely this. It provides almost no moisture, forcing the body to draw upon its internal reserves. Furthermore, the sheer lack of nutrients pushes the monk's metabolism to its absolute lowest ebb. The body, already stripped of fat, begins to consume muscle tissue in a desperate bid for survival. This process, known as autophagy, further reduces the body's mass and water content. The monk's skin would become thin and papery, stretched taut over his skeletal frame. His movements would become slow, deliberate, each one a conscious expenditure of a rapidly dwindling energy supply. He is, in a very real and biological sense, beginning to dry out from the inside. This stage is perhaps the ultimate test of endurance, where the boundary between spiritual discipline and sheer physical survival becomes almost non-existent. Every single day for nearly 3 years, the monk must find the strength to forage for his meager woody sustenance, chew the tough fibers, and force them down. Hunger is no longer a pang. It is a constant, overwhelming state of being. It is a fire in the belly that is never quenched. To continue under these conditions requires a mental fortitude that defies ordinary understanding. This is where the years of meditation become absolutely critical. The mind, trained to observe sensation without attachment, must now confront the body's primal scream for nourishment. It must recognize the pain, the weakness, the dizziness, but refuse to be governed by them. The mantra, the chant, the focus on the breath, these are not just spiritual exercises anymore. They are life support systems. They are the tools the monk uses to keep his spirit intact as his physical form wastes away. He is witnessing the slow, controlled dismantling of his own body, and he must do so with the serene detachment of an observer. Consider the symbolism of this diet. The monk is no longer consuming the fruits of the tree, its seeds and berries, which are associated with life, reproduction, and abundance. He is now consuming the tree itself, its structural elements, its bark, and its roots. He is ingesting the very essence of the mountain's endurance. The pine tree, an evergreen that withstands the harshest winters, becomes his primary source of life, however tenuous. There is a powerful metaphorical resonance here. He is attempting to take on the qualities of the wood itself, to become durable, resilient, and resistant to the natural cycles of growth and decay. He is transforming his soft mammalian flesh into something closer to the hard, unyielding nature of the forest that surrounds him. This is not just about biology, it is a profound act of ritual communion. He is literally incorporating the mountain's resilience into his own cellular structure, preparing his body to stand, like an ancient tree, against the winds of time. The second 1,000 days are also a period of increasing isolation. As the monk's physical strength wanes, his long pilgrimages would likely become shorter, his world shrinking to the immediate vicinity of his hermitage. His interactions with other monks would become minimal. This is a journey that must be taken alone. The experience of such extreme deprivation is intensely personal. It strips away all social masks, all pretense, until only the core of one's being remains. Who are you when you have no strength, no comfort, no food, no future in the conventional sense? This is the question the monk confronts in the silence of his mountain hut, day after grueling day. His resolve is tested not by a single heroic act, but by the relentless, monotonous grind of survival. It's the decision, made 1,000 times over, to get up one more morning, to chew one more piece of bark, to chant one more mantra, when every cell in his body is begging him to stop. By the end of this second stage, the monk is barely recognizable as a human being in the way we commonly understand it. He is emaciated, weak, and living at the absolute razor's edge of existence. But he has achieved the second critical step in his transformation. His body is now almost entirely devoid of the fats and fluids that fuel decomposition. He has turned his internal environment into a barren landscape. He has survived the unsurvivable. He has proven that his spirit is the undisputed master of his physical form. He is now ready for the final and perhaps most dangerous step of his preparation: the ingestion of a poison that will complete the process of turning his body into an incorruptible vessel. He is on the threshold, standing between the world of the living and the eternal meditation he seeks. After 2,000 days of systematic self-denial, after nearly 6 years of stripping his body down to its most essential components of bone, sinew, and spirit, the monk enters the final preparatory phase. This stage is shorter, lasting perhaps a few weeks to 100 days, but it is the most perilous and irreversible of all. The monk now begins to drink a special tea, a final addition to his meager diet of bark and roots. This is not a nourishing brew. It is a toxic concoction made from the sap of the urushi tree, a plant better known to the world as the Japanese lacquer tree. The sap, which is used to create the beautiful glossy finish on lacquerware, contains a powerful allergenic compound called urushiol. For most people, even slight contact with this sap causes a severe, blistering rash. To deliberately ingest it, even in a diluted form, is a shocking and dangerous act. From a biochemical perspective, this final ritual is a stroke of grim genius. It is the master key that locks the body against decay from the inside. When the monk drinks the urushi tea, he is essentially embalming himself while he is still alive. The toxic compounds slowly permeate his entire system, saturating his organs and gastrointestinal tract. The immediate effects are violent. It induces severe nausea, vomiting, and sweating, which serves a final practical purpose: the rapid expulsion of any remaining bodily fluids, completing the desiccation process he began years earlier. But the tea's primary function is realized after the monk's heart stops beating. The urushiol that has coated his internal organs acts as a powerful antimicrobial and antiparasitic agent. It creates a hostile, toxic environment within the body. Maggots, bacteria, and microbes, the tiny janitors of the natural world that are responsible for the process of decomposition, cannot survive in this lacquer-lined vessel. The body, which would normally be a feast for microorganisms, is rendered inedible, sterile. It effectively becomes its own preservation chamber. This act represents the ultimate convergence of spiritual will and natural chemistry. The monks, through centuries of trial and error, discovered a way to use a potent natural poison as a sacred tool of preservation. They learned how to harness the tree's defense mechanism for their own spiritual ends. Think about the level of commitment this requires. The monk, already weakened to the point of near death by years of starvation, must now willingly and repeatedly consume a substance that causes his body to revolt. Every sip is an ordeal. It is a final, agonizing purification. He is not just emptying his body of moisture, he is purging it of its very ability to participate in the natural cycle of decay and rebirth. He is consciously choosing to remove his physical form from that cycle, to set it apart as something different, something permanent. The spiritual symbolism of this final act is as potent as the tea itself. On one level, it is the ultimate act of renunciation. By making his own flesh poisonous, the monk performs a final, profound separation from the world of living things. He can no longer be consumed, literally or metaphorically. He is sealing himself off. But on another level, it is an act of profound commitment to his vow. This isn't a suicide in the conventional sense. It is the final, necessary step to ensure the success of his mission. Failure in this context would be for his body to rot. If his form decayed, it could not be enshrined. It could not serve as a beacon for the faithful. All the years of hardship would have been for nothing. The urushi tea is his guarantee. It is the final seal on his promise to remain incorrupt for the benefit of others. It is a painful, toxic, but necessary sacrament. This stage is also a point of no return. Once the process of ingesting the urushi sap begins, the body is irrevocably set on its course. The internal changes are permanent. There is no turning back, no last-minute change of heart. This final commitment elevates the entire endeavor beyond a mere ascetic practice. It becomes a direct, conscious engagement with the mechanics of death itself. The monk is not passively waiting for death to come to him. He is actively meeting it, shaping the very conditions of his body's transition from a living organism to a sacred relic. He is an alchemist, using poison, meditation, and unwavering will to transmute his perishable flesh into an eternal vessel of spirit. The pain and sickness caused by the tea are not seen as suffering to be lamented, but as the final fiery trial that burns away the last vestiges of his mortal, corruptible self. Imagine the final days of this process. The monk is now impossibly thin, his body a fragile shell. He is sustained by almost nothing, and what he does consume is a poison. His life force is reduced to a tiny flickering flame. Yet his mind, honed by years of discipline, remains clear. He is not in despair. He is in a state of heightened awareness, observing the final shutdown of his physical systems. His purpose has never been sharper. He has successfully navigated the 2,000-day journey. He has prepared his body with a precision that borders on the scientific. He has made his irreversible commitment. All that is left is the final act of meditation. The work of preparation is done. Now he must enter the earth. He is ready to be sealed in his stone womb, to take his seat in the darkness, and to ring a small bell, signaling to the world that his consciousness endures, even as his final breath draws near. The poison he drank was not to end his life, but to begin his true work. With his body now fully prepared, desiccated, stripped of fat, and permeated with the preservative toxins of the urushi sap, the time has come for the monk to make his final descent. He will not die in the open air, exposed to the elements. His transition must occur in a controlled, protected environment. This is the purpose of the *Sekishitsu*, the custom-built stone tomb. This is not an ornate mausoleum or a grand crypt. It is a structure of profound and intentional austerity. It is a small pit, dug into the sacred ground of the temple or a secluded spot on the mountain and lined with stones. It is built to be just large enough for one person to sit in the lotus position, and no larger. The space is so confined that once inside, movement is nearly impossible. The monk's knees, back, and head are often just inches from the cold, damp stone walls. This is not a chamber for rest. It is a vessel for transformation. It is a womb of stone and earth, designed to hold the monk as he undergoes his final metamorphosis. The day the monk enters the tomb is a solemn and significant occasion. It is not treated as a funeral because in the eyes of the community, this is not an end. It is a culmination. His fellow monks gather around the open pit, their faces not etched with grief, but with a deep, reverent respect for the journey he is completing. There is a ceremony filled with chanting and ritual, a final acknowledgement of the immense sacrifice and discipline they have all witnessed over the past several years. The monk, now incredibly frail but radiating a palpable sense of purpose, takes his seat inside the stone box for the last time. He settles into the lotus posture, the meditative pose he has held for countless hours. His hands rest in his lap, one holding the small bell that will be his final voice. He is not being forced into this space. He is entering it as a king enters his throne room. It is the place he has worked his entire life to reach. Once he is settled, the most dramatic part of the ritual begins. His fellow monks start to place heavy stone slabs over the top of the pit, one by one, sealing him inside. They are entombing their brother while he is still alive, still breathing, still conscious. Imagine the sound from within the tomb, the scraping of stone on stone, the muffled chants of his brothers, the world of light and sound being systematically closed off. Darkness descends, absolute and final. The air grows still and thick. But he is not left entirely without a connection to the world above. A single thin bamboo tube is carefully inserted through a small opening in the stones. One end rests near the monk's mouth, the other opens to the surface. This is his airway, a fragile thread of life connecting his subterranean chamber to the living world. It is a symbol of his unique state. No longer fully a part of the world of the living, but not yet fully transitioned into the silent meditation of a Sokushinbutsu. He is in the in-between, the liminal space, held in the earth's embrace. The psychological challenge of this final phase is almost impossible to overstate. We must try to place ourselves in his position. He is in total darkness, in a space so tight it is more like being worn than occupied. His body is at the very extremity of starvation. He is alone with his own consciousness in the most profound way imaginable. For most people, this scenario is the stuff of nightmares, being buried alive. It taps into our most primal fears of suffocation, confinement, and helplessness. But for the monk, the mindset is entirely different. This is not a punishment, it is a privilege. He has spent years training his mind to remain calm and centered in the face of extreme physical hardship. He has meditated under freezing waterfalls and on windswept peaks. All of that training was for this very moment. The tomb is not a prison, it is a sanctuary. It is the perfect distraction-free environment for the final, most important meditation of his life. Free from all sensory input, no light, no sound beyond his own breathing, no physical sensation other than the cold stone and the posture of his own body, he can turn his awareness completely inward. His only remaining task is to meditate, to chant, and to wait, and once a day, to perform one simple action. He lifts his hand and rings the small bell. The clear metallic sound travels up the bamboo tube, a faint but distinct signal to the monks on the surface. It is a message that says, "I am still here. I am still conscious. My spirit has not yet departed." For the monks above, hearing that daily ring is a confirmation that the process is continuing as it should. They are not waiting for him to die. They are standing vigil over a sacred transformation. They are the guardians of his final journey, and the faint sound of the bell is the only bulletin they receive from the world below. Days, perhaps weeks, will pass in this manner. For the monk inside, the concept of day and night dissolves into a seamless continuity of darkness and meditation. Time itself loses its meaning. There is only the breath, the mantra, and the silent patient waiting for the moment when his body will finally release its hold on his consciousness. The stone womb holds him, protects him, and allows him to complete his work in perfect, silent peace. He is a seed, planted in the earth, waiting to blossom into a different kind of life. Inside the stone womb, a new reality takes hold. The world is reduced to a singular point of consciousness, held within a body that is slowly, peacefully shutting down. Life in the tomb is the ultimate expression of meditative practice, a complete immersion in the inner self, free from every possible external distraction. There is no sunrise or sunset to mark the passage of time. There is no weather, no changing seasons, only the constant stable cool of the earth. The only sound is the one the monk creates himself, the whisper of his own breath moving through the bamboo tube, and the resonant vibration of his own chanted mantras. The darkness is not empty. It is filled with the presence of his own mind. He has spent years, even decades, preparing for this final, extended session of zazen or seated meditation. Every hardship, every meal of bark, every hour spent under a freezing waterfall was a preparation for this profound stillness. His central practice within the tomb is the recitation of mantras. In Shingon Buddhism, mantras are not simply prayers or affirmations. They are believed to be the sonic embodiments of cosmic truths, the actual vibrations of Buddhas and celestial beings. By chanting a mantra, the practitioner seeks to align their own energy with that of the divine, to dissolve the sense of a separate self and merge with the universal reality that the sound represents. In the total darkness and silence of the tomb, the mantra becomes everything. The monk would chant for hours on end, the vibrations of his voice filling the tiny chamber, resonating in his own bones. This is not a plea for rescue or a cry of despair. It is an act of creation. He is actively using the sound to maintain his focus, to ward off fear or stray thoughts, and to guide his consciousness toward the state of pure, unified awareness that is the goal of his life's work. The chant is his anchor in the vast, formless ocean of his final moments. And then there is the bell. This small, simple object is his final instrument of communication, his last physical act in the world. Once every 24 hours, he would summon the minuscule amount of remaining energy, lift his hand, and strike the bell. The single clear note that rings out is a testament to his continued existence, a signal of incredible endurance and unwavering focus. Consider the sheer willpower this requires. In a body ravaged by years of starvation and poisoned by lacquer tea, a state of weakness unimaginable to a healthy person, every movement is a colossal effort. To consciously and deliberately perform this action, day after day, is a monumental feat. The bell is a symbol that his mind is still sovereign over his failing body. It is a declaration that he has not slipped into a coma, that he has not been overcome by pain or fear. He is awake, aware, and in control of his own passage. Let us try to imagine the psychological state of the monk during this time. He is confronting death not as a terrifying unknown, but as a known, anticipated, and even welcomed part of his spiritual process. Death for him is not a failure or an accident. It is the final, focused act of a lifetime's practice. He is not being taken by death. He is actively and consciously entering into it. This changes everything. His meditation is likely focused on the dissolution of the self. He would be observing the slow fading of his physical senses, the weakening of his pulse, the shallowing of his breath, not with panic, but with the detached curiosity of a scientist observing a natural phenomenon. He is witnessing the unmaking of his physical form, and in doing so, affirming the belief that his true nature is not the body, but the timeless, formless consciousness that inhabits it. His final moments are not a struggle, but a release. He is letting go of his body as one might let go of a tool that has served its purpose and is now worn out. This perspective is the culmination of the doctrine of Sokushinbutsu, attaining Buddhahood in this very body. The final living moments in the tomb are the most critical part of the transformation. It is here that the monk must prove the truth of his training. Can he maintain his equanimity, his compassion, his enlightened mind, even as the biological machine of his body grinds to a halt? Can he face the void with a steady and unwavering heart? The process is designed to ensure that his last thoughts are not of fear or regret, but are pure, focused, and directed toward his vow of saving all beings. He is attempting to die with the mind of a Buddha, because it is believed that the final state of one's consciousness imprints itself upon the physical form and indeed upon the world. Day by day, the energy to lift the bell would diminish. The interval between breaths would grow longer. The voice chanting the mantras would become a fainter and fainter whisper. The monk would feel the life force ebbing from his limbs, a coldness spreading from his extremities inward. And yet, his mind remains a point of light in the darkness. He is not dying in a hospital bed surrounded by beeping machines, nor in a sudden violent accident. He is experiencing the most controlled, deliberate, and spiritually charged death imaginable. He chose the time, he chose the place, and he is choosing the manner of his own exit. It is the ultimate act of self-determination, performed not for selfish reasons, but in the service of a sacred, compassionate ideal. The darkness of the tomb is not an ending. It is the silent, holy sanctuary where a mortal man completes his work of becoming an eternal presence. On the surface, life continues. The monks of the temple go about their daily routines of chores, chants, and study. The seasons continue their inexorable turn, dusting the mountain with snow or painting it with the green of new life. But for a small group of senior monks, there is an added ritual, a quiet daily pilgrimage to a specific, unassuming spot on the temple grounds. Here, they kneel down, placing their ears close to the end of a bamboo tube that emerges like a strange reed from the earth. They are listening. They are waiting for a sound that is both a sign of life and a countdown to its departure. And for days, perhaps weeks, it comes, the faint, clear ring of a small bell from deep beneath their feet. Each time they hear it, they nod in acknowledgement, their vigil affirmed for another day. The sound is a reassurance that their brother's immense struggle continues, that his consciousness is still burning bright in the darkness below. Then, one day, they come and listen, and there is only silence. They wait. They listen again, straining to hear the familiar note that has punctuated their days. But it does not come. The silence from the bamboo tube is no longer just an absence of sound. It has become a message in itself. The bell has fallen silent. This is the moment they have been waiting for. This is the sign that the monk's heart has stopped beating, that his breath has ceased, and that his final, conscious meditation has concluded. He has passed from the state of a living ascetic into the process of becoming a Sokushinbutsu. There is no frantic rush, no alarm. There is only a deep, solemn understanding. The final whisper from the world below has been uttered and received. The great work has reached its next, critical phase. The community's response to this silence is not one of mourning in the way we typically understand it. There are no public displays of grief, no weeping. The atmosphere is one of profound reverence and purposeful activity. They are not losing a member of their community. They are witnessing the birth of a holy being. Their role now shifts from that of distant observers to active custodians of this sacred process. Their first action is methodical and precise. They carefully remove the bamboo air tube from the earth. This act is deeply symbolic. It is the severing of the final physical tie between the monk's subterranean world and the world of the living. The thread has been cut. With the airway removed, the monks then work to hermetically seal the tomb. They use plaster or clay to close off any remaining cracks or openings in the stone structure, making it as airtight as possible. This is a crucial step. The success of the mummification depends on creating a stable, dry environment, free from the fluctuations of external humidity, and, most importantly, free from the insects and microorganisms that could enter from the outside and begin the process of decay. The tomb is now a completely isolated system, a sealed vessel where the slow, quiet chemistry of preservation can proceed undisturbed. The community's role is now one of patient guardianship. They are not mourning a death. They are safeguarding a sacred transformation. The sealed tomb becomes a place of special veneration. Other monks might come to meditate near the spot, to feel the presence of the master who is undergoing his change within the earth. They are not praying asterisk for asterisk him, as one might pray for the soul of the deceased to have a safe journey. They are praying asterisk with asterisk him, connecting to the powerful spiritual energy they believe is emanating from his silent form. He has become a focal point for the community's faith even before his body is seen again. The story of his sacrifice, his years of discipline, and his peaceful entry into the tomb becomes a source of inspiration, a living teaching for all who remain. He is a testament to the highest ideals of their spiritual path, a tangible example of what is possible through unwavering devotion. This perspective highlights a fundamental difference in how death is perceived in this context. In many cultures, a dead body is seen as something unclean, something to be disposed of quickly, a source of potential ritual pollution. The focus is on the departed soul, with the physical remains being a secondary, temporary concern. Here the opposite is true. The body is the entire point. It is not an empty shell, but the very crucible of enlightenment, a sacred object in the making. The community's careful sealing of the tomb is an act of profound respect for the flesh. They are treating the monk's body with the same care a sculptor might give to a masterpiece sealed in a kiln, waiting for the transformative fire to complete its work. The earth itself is the kiln, and the slow passage of time is the fire. Their job is to ensure the conditions are perfect. For the next 1,000 days, the tomb will remain sealed. This is a period of waiting dictated by tradition and a deep practical understanding of the preservation process. It is a final, extended period of quiet gestation. The community must have faith in the process, faith in the monk's preparation, and faith that his spirit remains present, overseeing its own bodily transformation. They have done everything they can. They have witnessed his journey. They have sealed him in his final resting place, and now they must simply wait. The silent tomb becomes a quiet, potent symbol in the heart of the monastery. It is a reminder of the ultimate goal of their practice and the extraordinary lengths to which one can go in the service of a compassionate vow. The silence is not an emptiness. It is a fullness, a presence, a promise waiting to be fulfilled. The bell will not ring again, but its final note echoes in the memory of the community as they begin the long count of days until the great unsealing. For 1,000 days, the tomb remains a silent feature of the landscape, a sealed mound of earth and stone that holds a sacred secret. This period of waiting is as much a part of the ritual as the preparation that preceded it. It is an exercise in communal patience and faith. 3 years pass. The seasons cycle through their rhythms. New students arrive at the monastery, and old monks pass away in the conventional manner. And all the while, the buried monk rests in his subterranean chamber, his form undergoing a slow, invisible alchemy. This 1,000-day waiting period is not an arbitrary number. It is a practical necessity, a time frame understood through generations of practice to be sufficient for the natural processes of desiccation to complete their work within the controlled, sealed environment of the tomb. The last vestiges of moisture within the body's tissues slowly evaporate. The flesh hardens. The skin tightens around the bones. The urushi tea continues its silent work, ensuring the internal environment remains sterile and hostile to decay. The body is slowly settling into its final, permanent state. Finally, the day of the unsealing arrives. This is a momentous occasion, drawing not only the entire monastic community, but often lay followers from surrounding villages as well. There is a palpable sense of anticipation, a mixture of solemnity and hope. This is the moment of truth. It is the day when the outcome of nearly a decade of unimaginable effort will be revealed. Was the monk's preparation perfect? Was his spirit strong enough? Did his body successfully resist the natural pull of dissolution? The ceremony begins with chants and prayers, honoring the spirit of the monk and the profound sacrifice he made. Senior monks, with slow and deliberate movements, begin the work of opening the tomb. They carefully chip away the plaster seal, their tools making sharp, clear sounds in the quiet air. Then, with coordinated effort, they begin to lift the heavy stone slabs that form the roof of the chamber. As the first shafts of daylight pierce the darkness of the tomb for the first time in 3 years, a collective breath is held. The criteria for success are immediate, visual, and unforgiving. As the interior of the tomb is revealed, the senior monks look for one thing above all: the absence of decay. The body must be perfectly preserved. The skin, though darkened and leathery, must be intact. There can be no sign of rot, no smell of putrefaction, no evidence of insect activity. The monk must be found sitting exactly as he was when he was sealed in, upright in the lotus position, a posture of serene and unbroken meditation. His form should be desiccated, light and hard to the touch, more like ancient wood or leather than human flesh. He has not become a skeleton with bones picked clean, nor has he become a rotting corpse. He must exist in that specific, remarkable state in between, a perfectly preserved human mummy, created not by embalmers after death, but by the will of the man himself before it. If these criteria are met, a wave of jubilation and profound reverence washes over the assembled crowd. The monk has succeeded. He has achieved his goal. He has become a Sokushinbutsu. This is not just a personal victory. It is a triumph for the entire community, a powerful affirmation of their faith and the efficacy of their spiritual path. The successful monk is seen as a true Buddha, a powerful spiritual being who has chosen to remain in the world out of compassion. His perfectly preserved body is the physical proof of his immense spiritual attainment. It is a miracle made manifest through discipline, and it serves as a source of immense pride and spiritual encouragement for everyone present. The air fills with celebratory chants. The mood shifts from one of anxious hope to one of joyful certainty. Their master has returned to them, not as a memory, but as an eternal physical presence. However, success was not always guaranteed. The process was incredibly difficult, and for every monk who succeeded, many others likely failed. If the monks opened the tomb to find that the body had decayed, the reaction was entirely different. There was no shame or condemnation. The monk's incredible effort was still held in the highest regard. His years of asceticism and his courage in entering the tomb were honored as a profound act of devotion. But he was not considered a Sokushinbutsu. His body had not successfully transformed. In this case, the tomb would be respectfully resealed, and the monk would be left to rest in the earth, honored as a great ascetic but not venerated as a living Buddha. The community would offer prayers for him, and his story would still be told as one of great spiritual striving. The failure was seen not as a spiritual failing but a physical one, a small miscalculation in diet, an unforeseen environmental factor, some small element that allowed the forces of nature to take their course. This moment of exhumation and verification is the critical bridge between the monk's private journey and his public role. Up until this point, his struggle was intensely personal, witnessed only by a few. Now his success or failure becomes a public matter, a lesson for the entire community. The successful Sokushinbutsu is a validation of the entire cosmological worldview of Shingon Buddhism. He is living proof that Buddhahood is attainable in this very body, that a human being can transcend the ordinary limitations of mortality. The unsealing is therefore not just the opening of a tomb. It is the unveiling of a sacred relic, the presentation of a new object of worship, and the fulfillment of a promise made nearly a decade before. The solitary ascetic who entered the earth has now been reborn as a public saint, ready to begin his new eternal life of service. Once a monk has been successfully exhumed and his preservation confirmed, his journey enters its final public phase. He is no longer regarded as a deceased human being. He is a Sokushinbutsu, a living Buddha, and his treatment from this moment forward reflects this exalted status. His desiccated form is not an object of morbidity or sadness. It is a source of immense spiritual power and communal pride. The first act of veneration is to carefully lift his body from the stone tomb that served as his chrysalis. His form is incredibly fragile, light as dry wood, and must be handled with the utmost care and reverence. He is then gently cleaned, and the earthy remnants of his long entombment are brushed away. This is followed by a ceremony in which he is dressed for the first time in many years in the ornate and colorful robes of a high-ranking Buddhist priest. The contrast is visually stunning. The rich, vibrant silks draped over a dark, wizened form that has transcended the flesh. In some cases, his eye sockets, now empty, would be fitted with glass or painted stones, giving the impression of a gaze that looks both inward and outward at the same time. Thus adorned, the Sokushinbutsu is brought to the main temple building and ceremonially enshrined upon an altar. He is placed in a special alcove, often surrounded by candles, incense, and offerings from the faithful. He is now a central object of worship, the spiritual heart of the temple. He is not a statue carved from wood or cast in bronze. He is a Buddha of flesh and bone, a man who has become a sacred object through his own volition. The belief that underpins this veneration is critical to understand. The Sokushinbutsu is not dead. He is, according to the doctrine, in a state of nyūjō, the same profound eternal meditation as the great founder Kūkai. His spirit has not departed to another realm. It remains fully present, inhabiting his preserved body, though his biological functions have ceased. He is accessible. Believers feel they can communicate with him, that he can hear their prayers, and that his spiritual presence radiates out into the world, offering protection, healing, and guidance. His new life is one of perpetual service. The physical presence of the Sokushinbutsu transforms the temple into a major pilgrimage site. People would travel great distances to be in his presence. They would come to pray for health, for a successful harvest, for the well-being of their families, or simply to sit in quiet contemplation before him, hoping to absorb some of the spiritual power that emanates from his form. He becomes a living oracle, a tangible link to the divine. The monks of the temple become the caretakers of this living Buddha. They maintain his shrine, change his robes at regular intervals, a ceremony in itself, and act as intermediaries for the pilgrims who come to see him. The belief in his continued presence is so strong that for centuries, it was a common practice for believers to take small fragments of his robes or even tiny scrapings from his body to use as powerful amulets or medicinal charms. He has fulfilled his ultimate vow to remain in the world in the most literal and physical way imaginable, to continue helping sentient beings long after his mortal life has ended. This practice creates a fascinating social and religious dynamic. The Sokushinbutsu becomes a source of immense spiritual and even economic capital for the temple. His presence ensures a steady flow of pilgrims and donations, guaranteeing the monastery's survival and prosperity for generations. But more importantly, he becomes a permanent anchor for the community's faith. In a world of constant change, of birth and death, of political upheaval and natural disaster, the unchanging form of the Sokushinbutsu on his altar is a symbol of permanence and stability. He is a testament to the idea that something can endure. His story, which every child in the local area would grow up hearing, becomes a powerful moral and spiritual teaching. It is a story of the ultimate potential of human discipline, faith, and compassion. He is not a distant, abstract God, but a local man who, through his own efforts, became a Buddha. It makes the ultimate goal of their religion feel attainable, real, and present in their own community. The social impact, therefore, is profound. The Sokushinbutsu is not just a religious figure. He is a local hero, a protector, and a defining feature of the region's identity. His presence solidifies the temple's importance and reinforces the spiritual authority of the Shingon sect. He is a constant, silent sermon in flesh and bone, teaching the core values of the faith: endurance, self-sacrifice, and the compassionate vow to serve others. The ritual that began in the solitary darkness of the mountains has now come full circle. The monk who gave up everything, food, comfort, companionship, and finally life itself, has, in return, received a form of immortality, not for his own sake, but for the sake of the countless people who would look to his silent, seated form for hope and inspiration. His body, once a source of pain and temptation to be overcome, has become the very medium of his eternal compassion. His sacrifice has been transformed into a lasting gift, a spiritual wellspring from which his community can drink for centuries to come. The man is gone, but the Buddha remains. The practice of Sokushinbutsu is not a generalized legend. It is a history written in the preserved bodies of real individuals. To move from the abstract process to the human reality, we must travel to the remote, mist-shrouded mountains of Yamagata Prefecture in northern Japan. This is the heartland of the Dewa Sanzan, the three sacred mountains of Haguro, Gasan, and Yudono, a place of pilgrimage and severe ascetic training for centuries. It is here, in the small, secluded temples that cling to the mountainsides, that a number of these living Buddhas are still enshrined today, offering a direct, tangible link to this astonishing tradition. Visiting them is a profound experience. You leave the modern world behind and enter a realm of ancient cedar forests, chanting monks, and the quiet, powerful presence of men who conquered death to keep a promise. Perhaps the most famous of all Sokushinbutsu is Daijuku Bosatsu Shinyokai Shonin, who is enshrined at the Dainichibo Temple on the slopes of Mount Yudono. His story crystallizes the motivations behind the practice. Born in the late 18th century, he lived through a period of severe famine that devastated the region. According to temple records, he was so moved by the immense suffering he witnessed, people starving, families torn apart, that he made a vow to enter the path of Sokushinbutsu specifically to alleviate this suffering and bring prosperity back to the land. His wasn't a quest for personal enlightenment in a vacuum. It was a direct, compassionate response to a communal crisis. He undertook the grueling multi-year preparation, and in 1783, at the age of 96, he entered his tomb. When he was exhumed, he was found to be perfectly preserved. Today, he sits in a glass case in the temple, a small, dark, and incredibly powerful figure. Believers still pray to him for relief from hardship, seeing him not as a historical artifact, but as the living embodiment of the compassion that first set him on his path. Another remarkable example is Tetsumunkai Shonin, enshrined at the Churinji Temple, also near Mount Yudono. His story is one of redemption. In his earlier life, he was a samurai who, according to some accounts, had killed a man. To atone for this act of taking a life, he became a monk and dedicated himself to public service, helping to build roads and irrigation systems. But he felt this was not enough. To truly purify his karma and dedicate himself to the salvation of all beings, he chose to undertake the ultimate ascetic practice. He entered his tomb in 1829. When visiting Churenji, you can see not only his perfectly preserved form, but also a photograph taken in the early 20th century, showing the monks changing his robes. The image is startlingly intimate, bridging the gap between past and present. It underscores the continuous living relationship the community has with these figures. Tetsumonkai's story provides a different motivation, not just compassion for others' suffering, but a profound need to transmute one's own past misdeeds into a future of sacred service. These are not isolated cases. It is estimated that over 24 such monks may have existed, although only around 16 can be viewed by the public today in various temples throughout the region. Each one has a name, a history, and a motivation. There is Tetsuryukai at Nangakuji Temple, who is said to have sacrificed one of his own eyes as an offering before beginning his final journey. His preserved form is a stark reminder of the physical extremes these men were willing to endure. These personal histories are crucial because they prevent us from seeing Sokushinbutsu as a monolithic, anonymous tradition. It was a path walked by individual human beings, each with his own unique life story, his own pains, and his own profound reasons for making such an incredible choice. They were not faceless ascetics. They were men like Shinyokai, driven by empathy, or Tetsumonkai, seeking atonement. Their preserved bodies are not just triumphs of mummification. They are the final, enduring chapters of deeply personal stories. Visiting these temples today is a journey into a different understanding of time and presence. The air is thick with the scent of aged wood and a century of incense. The monks who act as custodians of the Sokushinbutsu speak of them in the present tense. They are not the remains of, they are. This linguistic choice is telling. The Sokushinbutsu are not dead, they are here. For a visitor, the experience can be unsettling, awe-inspiring, and deeply thought-provoking. To stand before the physical form of a man who willingly starved himself, drank poison, and had himself buried alive over 200 years ago is to come face to face with a level of faith and determination that is almost beyond modern comprehension. It forces you to question your own assumptions about life, death, and the limits of human will. These specific monks of Yamagata, with their names and their stories, ground the practice in a tangible reality. They show us that the why behind Sokushinbutsu was not a cold, abstract theological doctrine. It was a deeply felt personal response to the suffering and imperfection of the world. It was an attempt, in the most extreme way imaginable, to leave behind a permanent legacy of compassion. The silent, seated figures of Shinyokai and Tetsumonkai are not just mummies. They are vows, rendered in flesh and bone, that continue to resonate with power and purpose in the quiet mountain temples where they still keep their eternal watch. They are the human faces of a superhuman endeavor. The The concentration of Sokushinbutsu practitioners in the remote northern region of Dewa Sanzan is no accident. This is not a practice that could have arisen just anywhere. It is deeply and inextricably linked to the landscape itself, a landscape that is both a crucible of hardship and a sacred living entity. The three sacred mountains of Dewa Sanzan, Haguro, Gasan, and Yudono, have been a center for Shugendo, a unique Japanese tradition of mountain asceticism, for well over 1,000 years. Shugendo blends elements of Buddhism, Taoism, and ancient Shinto nature worship, and its practitioners, known as *Yamabushi*, or mountain prostrators, believe that spiritual power can be cultivated through rigorous physical and mental training in the wilderness. The mountains are their monastery. Sokushinbutsu, therefore, can be seen as the most extreme and literal expression of this mountain-based faith. It is a practice born from a place that demands resilience and offers a unique kind of spiritual sustenance. The geography of the Dewa Sanzan region provided, quite literally, the ingredients for self-mummification. The vast, dense forests offered the nuts, seeds, and berries required for the first 1,000-day diet. More importantly, the mountains were covered in pine trees, whose bark, needles, and roots formed the basis of the second, more severe dietary phase. And crucially, it was here that the urushi tree grew, the source of the toxic lacquer sap that was the final key ingredient in the preservation process. The entire pharmacopoeia for this incredible transformation was provided by the mountain itself. The landscape was not just a backdrop for the practice, it was an active participant. The monks were consuming the mountain, incorporating its essence into their bodies, seeking to take on its enduring, timeless qualities. Their diet was a form of communion with the sacred environment that surrounded them, a slow, methodical process of becoming one with the spirit of the place. Furthermore, the sheer harshness of the environment was a critical part of the training. Northern Japan is known for its heavy snowfall and brutally cold winters. For a monk living in a simple hermitage, surviving the winter on a diet of bark and roots was a trial by fire, or rather, by ice. The cold itself would have aided the process, slowing the metabolism and requiring the body to burn every last calorie reserve just to maintain a core temperature. The isolation imposed by the winter snows also created the perfect conditions for deep, uninterrupted meditation. Cut off from the rest of the world for months at a time, the aspiring Sokushinbutsu had nothing but his own mind and the howling of the wind for company. This forced solitude was not a punishment. It was an essential part of the process, stripping away all social distractions and forcing a profound confrontation with the self. The mountain, in its unforgiving beauty, acted as both a physical and a spiritual forge, burning away impurities and tempering the monk's resolve. The sacred nature of the mountains also played a vital role. Each of the three peaks of Dewa Sanzan represents a different aspect of a spiritual journey. Mount Haguro represents birth in the present world. The ascent of Mount Gasan, the highest of the three, with its often snow-capped peak and otherworldly terrain, represents death and the afterlife. Finally, the pilgrimage to Mount Yudono, with its rust-colored hot springs and stark volcanic landscape, represents rebirth. Pilgrims traditionally walk this route in sequence, symbolically enacting a cycle of death and rebirth. For the Sokushinbutsu monks, this was not just a symbol, it was their literal path. Their entire practice was a conscious enactment of this journey. They were dying to the world on the slopes of Mount Gassen to be reborn as an eternal Buddha at Mount Udono. Their entombment in the earth was a direct participation in this sacred geography. They were planting themselves in the soil of rebirth, hoping to emerge transformed. This deep connection between the practice and the place explains why Sokushinbutsu did not spread widely to other parts of Japan. While Shingon Buddhism is practiced throughout the country, this specific, extreme offshoot required the unique combination of factors found only in the Dewa Sanzan, a tradition of intense mountain asceticism, a geography that provided the necessary diet and isolation, and a climate that pushed the body to its absolute limits. The practice grew out of the soil of Yamagata as naturally as the pine and lacquer trees that made it possible. It was a localized spiritual technology, developed by people who had an intimate, multi-generational knowledge of their environment and its potent spiritual energies. So, when we picture the monk in his tomb, we must also picture the mountain around him. We must imagine the silent, snow-covered forests, the wind carving through the valleys, and the ancient rocky peaks that have witnessed countless generations of ascetics. The monk is not just in a stone box. He is in the heart of the mountain. He is a product of that landscape, his desiccated body a testament to its power to both challenge and sustain. The story of Sokushinbutsu is not just the story of a few extraordinary men. It is also the story of a mountain, a place so powerful and so sacred that it could inspire a faith that dared to transform mortality itself. The landscape was the temple, the teacher, and the ultimate partner in their quest for eternity. For centuries, the practice of Sokushinbutsu continued in the isolated mountain communities of northern Japan, a sacred tradition passed down from master to disciple. It existed outside the purview of the central government, a local custom rooted in an ancient mountain-based faith. But this isolation could not last forever. In the latter half of the 19th century, Japan underwent one of the most rapid and radical societal transformations in human history, the Meiji Restoration. Beginning in 1868, the feudal shogunate was overthrown and power was consolidated under Emperor Meiji. The new government embarked on a fervent campaign of modernization, seeking to catch up with the Western powers that were increasingly asserting their influence in Asia. The national slogan became *Fukoku Kyohei, enrich the country, strengthen the military. This meant industrialization, centralization, and the adoption of Western science, technology, and legal systems. And in this rush toward a new modern identity, ancient religious practices that seemed strange or barbaric to the outside world were suddenly viewed with embarrassment. The Meiji government sought to present Japan as a civilized, rational, and modern nation. As part of this effort, it initiated a policy of separating Shinto and Buddhism, which had been syncretically intertwined for over a millennium. Shinto was elevated as the official state religion, closely tied to the divinity of the emperor, while Buddhism, seen as a foreign import, was disestablished and, in some cases, actively persecuted. Within this context of religious reorganization and the drive for modernization, the practice of Sokushinbutsu was an obvious target. To the newly westernized bureaucrats in Tokyo, the idea of monks starving themselves and being buried alive was not a profound spiritual act. It was a relic of a superstitious feudal past. It was seen as a form of assisted suicide, a bizarre and gruesome custom that had no place in the New Japan. It was a potential source of shame, something that Western observers might point to as evidence of Japan's backwardness. And so, in 1877, the Meiji government officially outlawed Sokushinbutsu. The law was broad, prohibiting anyone from opening a grave without a permit, but its clear intention was to put an end to the unsealing ceremonies that were central to the Sokushinbutsu tradition. It also reinforced existing laws against suicide and assisting in a suicide, making the entire process, from the dietary preparation to the entombment, illegal. The government was effectively drawing a sharp legal line between life and death. The ambiguous, liminal state of the Sokushinbutsu, not quite dead, not quite alive, was incompatible with the new, modern legal code. Death was now to be a purely medical and bureaucratic event, to be certified by a doctor and registered with the state. The idea of a sacred, self-directed death was legislated out of existence. This legal ban brought an end to a tradition that had endured for nearly 1,000 years. But the spirit of the practice did not die overnight. The final person known to have completed the full process was a monk named Kūkai, who was sealed in his tomb in 1878, a year asterisk after asterisk the practice was banned. He did so in defiance of the new law, a final silent protest in the name of his ancient faith. However, knowing that his followers could be prosecuted for assisting him, his exhumation was not conducted in the traditional way. His tomb was left sealed, and he was registered with the authorities as having died from illness. It wasn't until many years later, under a different legal climate, that his grave was finally opened by researchers. They found him perfectly preserved in the lotus position, a successful Sokushinbutsu who became so in secret, a final clandestine practitioner of a forbidden art. His story marks the definitive end of an era. The outlawing of Sokushinbutsu represents a classic clash between two different worldviews. On one side, you have an ancient spiritual tradition that views the body as a potential vehicle for transcendence and sees death as a controllable, meaningful transition. On the other side, you have a modern secular state that views the body as a biological machine and death as a medical failure, with the state holding the ultimate authority over the life and death of its citizens. The state could not accommodate a practice where an individual claimed the ultimate authority over his own mortality, especially for reasons it deemed irrational. The ban was, in essence, a victory of the modern clinical definition of death over an ancient spiritual one. And so the path of the living Buddhas faded into history, forced into obsolescence by the relentless march of modernity. The tradition that had been nurtured by the sacred mountains was ultimately extinguished by a decree from a distant capital city. The existing Sokushinbutsu, already enshrined in their temples, were allowed to remain as objects of veneration, but they were now reframed as artifacts of a bygone age. They became part of Japan's cultural heritage rather than its living spiritual present. The law could stop future monks from entering the tomb, but it could not erase the powerful legacy of those who had already completed the journey. The silent figures on their altars became even more potent symbols, representing not only a path to enlightenment, but also a lost world of faith, a time when the boundary between the physical and the spiritual, between life and death, was understood. In a profoundly different way, while the practice of Sokushinbutsu is unique in its precise methodology, the underlying human impulse it represents, the belief that a physical body can, through sanctity or a special death, transcend the normal process of decay, is remarkably universal. Placing these Japanese monks in a global context reveals a fascinating cross-cultural preoccupation with the idea of the incorruptible body. It seems that across different religions and continents, humanity has often interpreted the defiance of decay as a sign of divine favor, a physical manifestation of extraordinary spiritual power. By looking at these parallel traditions, we can see that Sokushinbutsu, for all its extremity, is not an isolated anomaly, but rather a uniquely Japanese expression of a much broader human theme. Perhaps the most well-known parallel comes from the Catholic Church, with its long history of the incorruptibles. These are the bodies of saints which, without any deliberate embalming or mummification, have been found to be miraculously preserved, remaining flexible, lifelike, and free from the odor of decay, sometimes for centuries after their death. A famous example is Saint Bernadette Soubirous, the visionary of Lourdes who died in 1879. Her body was exhumed multiple times over the following decades and was found to be remarkably preserved. Today, she lies in a glass reliquary in Nevers, France, a major pilgrimage site. The theological interpretation is fundamentally different from that of Sokushinbutsu. Incorruptibility in the Catholic tradition is not something achieved by the saint's own efforts. It is a miracle, a sign granted by God to affirm the individual's holiness. It is a passive state, a divine gift, not an active, self-directed process. And yet, the result is strikingly similar. The preserved body becomes a sacred relic, a physical focal point for veneration, and a tangible link between the faithful on earth and the holy in heaven. Another powerful comparison can be found in the traditions of Tibetan Buddhism, which are closely related to the Shingon school that produced Sokushinbutsu. High-ranking lamas who die in a state of deep meditation are sometimes believed to have entered a state called *tukdam*. In this state, though they are clinically dead by Western standards, no breath, no heartbeat, their bodies are said to remain warm and free from decay for days or even weeks. Scientists have become increasingly interested in this phenomenon, with studies being conducted under the guidance of the Dalai Lama to understand it. The belief is that the master's consciousness remains subtly present, holding the body in a state of grace before its final dissolution. In some historical cases, masters who died in this state were then interred, packed in salt, in a seated meditative posture, resulting in a form of mummification. Like the Sokushinbutsu, these masters are believed to remain present, their preserved forms acting as a blessing for the monastery and its followers. The emphasis, again, is on the power of meditation to influence the physical body, even at the moment of death. We can find echoes of this in other parts of the world as well. In ancient China, the bodies of some revered Chan, Zen masters were also found to be preserved. They were often lacquered, gilded, and enshrined, becoming flesh-body bodhisattvas. The process was sometimes assisted after death, but the foundation was the belief that the master's lifelong practice of meditation had purified his body to such an extent that it naturally resisted decay. Even in secular contexts, we see a fascination with preserved bodies. The embalmed forms of figures like Vladimir Lenin or Eva Peron were preserved for political, not religious reasons, to create a sense of permanence and a focal point for a national ideology. While the motivation is entirely different, it taps into the same deep human instinct, the desire to make a powerful presence endure, to cheat the finality of death by preserving the physical form. What this global tour of sanctified bodies shows is that the Sokushinbutsu monks were wrestling with a universal set of questions. What is the relationship between the body and the spirit? Can extraordinary virtue or spiritual power leave a mark on the flesh? Is it possible to create a form of permanence in a transient world? Each culture answered these questions in its own way, shaped by its own theology and technology. The Catholics saw preservation as a divine miracle. The Tibetans saw it as a result of profound meditative states at the time of death. The Japanese monks of Dewa Sanzan, in their uniquely practical and determined way, developed an entire system, a spiritual and biological technology, to actively bring it about themselves. Their method was not passive hope, it was active creation. This comparative perspective allows us to appreciate the Sokushinbutsu practice on a deeper level. It was not a bizarre, isolated cult, but a highly disciplined, systematic, and culturally specific answer to a universal human yearning. The desire to see the physical body as a potential conduit for the divine, as something more than just perishable meat, is a thread that runs through our shared history. The monk in his tomb, in all his shocking extremity, is a cousin to the incorruptible saint in her glass coffin, and the Tibetan master in his state of *tukdum*. They all represent humanity's profound and complex effort to find meaning in mortality, and to believe that under certain extraordinary conditions, the vessel of the soul can become a timeless beacon. We began our journey together with a single stark image: a man in a stone box, holding a bell, consciously waiting for his own death. We asked a simple question: why? Now, at the end of our exploration, the answer reveals itself to be as complex and profound as the practice itself. The why is not a desire for an easy afterlife, nor a morbid fascination with death, nor even a quest for personal glory. At its very core, the motivation for Sokushinbutsu is rooted in a radical and almost incomprehensible form of compassion. It is the physical manifestation of the Bodhisattva vow, the promise to postpone one's own final enlightenment in order to remain in the world and help all other beings achieve theirs. The monk chose this agonizing path not to escape the world, but to bind himself to it in the most permanent way he could conceive. In Sokushinbutsu, the body is transformed from the ultimate symbol of impermanence into a tool for an enduring purpose. In our modern lives, we often treat the body as a project for personal optimization, for health, for beauty, for longevity. For the monk, the body was a project of a different kind. It was something to be disciplined, purified, and ultimately sacrificed, not for the self, but for the other. The entire multi-year process was a systematic rejection of the ego. Every pang of hunger, every shiver in the cold, every agonizing sip of lacquer tea was a step away from personal desire and a step toward a universal vow. The final act of entombment was the ultimate dissolution of the self. He was giving up not only his life, but his very flesh, turning it into a public utility for the spiritual well-being of future generations. He was making his own body the final, lasting sermon of his life. The practice weaves together the threads we have followed. The spiritual belief in attaining Buddhahood in this very body, the scientific reality of mummification through diet and biochemistry, and the profound influence of a sacred, demanding landscape. It represents a worldview where the spiritual and the physical are not in conflict, but are partners in a grand alchemical project. The monks were not mystics who floated above the material world. They were deeply practical, using their intimate knowledge of biology and botany to achieve a spiritual goal. They understood that fat leads to rot, that dehydration preserves, and that certain poisons can sterilize. They harnessed the laws of nature not to defy them, but to guide them toward a sacred outcome. In this sense, they were both supreme spiritual masters and master morticians, with their own bodies as the subject. And yet, as we sit with this understanding, new questions arise, questions that perhaps have no definitive answers. What does this practice, in all its extremity, reveal about the human capacity for faith? What does it say about our relationship with our own mortality? In a world that so often seeks to delay or deny death, to hide it away behind hospital curtains, what can we learn from a tradition that chose to walk toward it with such deliberation and purpose? Sokushinbutsu forces us to confront the outer limits of human belief and endurance. It asks us to consider what we would be willing to sacrifice for a cause greater than ourselves. For most of us, the answer would not involve self-mummification, but the question itself is a valuable one. It pushes us to examine the nature of our own vows, our own commitments, our own definitions of a life well lived. This is not a path to be emulated, nor a practice to be revived. Its time is past, legislated out of existence by a modern world with a different understanding of life and death. But its story remains a powerful and unsettling testament. It is a reminder that the human relationship with mortality is not fixed. It is fluid, creative, and culturally bound. It shows us that there have been people who looked at the finality of death and saw not an ending, but an opportunity for a final radical act of service. The silent seated figures in the mountain temples of Japan are more than just preserved bodies. They are questions, posed in flesh and bone. They ask us to consider the meaning of sacrifice, the power of belief, and the extraordinary things the human spirit can achieve when driven by a compassionate vow. The story of the monk and his bell is a journey into a space where faith, biology, and willpower converge in a way that is both terrifying and beautiful. It is a testament to a time when a human being could, through sheer force of will, transform his own body into a final, enduring prayer for the world. And in the quiet resonance of that idea, we can perhaps find a deeper appreciation for the complex, mysterious, and profound ways in which humanity has always sought to make peace with its own fleeting existence.